Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Justice League: The New Frontier from 2008. Now, this is the second DC animated universe film direct-to-DVD thing ever released, and it is usually considered to be sort of, depending on who you ask, I guess, the first real critically acclaimed one of those features. It seems like Superman Doomsday really didn't have aged as well as this did. And this is based on the Darwin Cook limited series. Now, this basically takes the idea of the Justice League comics and when they originally started, which was in the early 60s, I believe, which was a big momentous thing. It actually helped influence kind of start the idea that Marvel's editor-in-chief wanted them to make superhero team books because of the success of Justice League. It was a big deal comic book-wise. It was a huge hit. And so what this does is it takes the idea that started around then and puts it actually more in the time period of the late 50s, early 60s, and that kind of changeover from the kind of more divisive politics of the 1950s. It wasn't this idyllic time that sometimes media and so forth likes to pretend it as, which is actually fairly interesting. The idea of specifically also because you had comics changing from the Golden Age to the Silver Age, and Justice League and specifically the Flash actually had a lot to do with that. So doing that kind of naturally works within that, and they do that really well, having Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman represent, obviously being the big three of DC, and having them be more of the older Golden Age guard, and having these new people come in, particularly the two who are the focus of this, more Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter, but sort of the Flash also, even though if you're really gonna go more into it, I guess you could do the Flash. The government is trying to sort of kind of rein in the superheroes and doing it more like McCarthyism, so it isn't totally like a Watchmen sort of riff, even though it is, or The Incredibles, which had already come out at this point. It's an interesting kind of concept, but I think the concept of it is something that probably would have worked better for a TV show or a longer movie. I found myself actually, this is weird because I think this is a good movie. I don't think it's a bad movie, but when I got towards the end, I was like, oh, so that's all there is for this movie? Is this? Like, I wanted more. Some bad movies feel like you're getting a weird cut of a better movie, but this felt like there could have been a lot more there. You could have gone into a lot more things, and I think that could have been a lot more interesting, really. I would have liked to see more. Even the title of The New Frontier is from a John F. Kennedy speech, which they have audio from at the end of this. It very much goes into the time period. It's kind of interesting how they have all these heroes in there and can naturally get that to work within the kind of time period of the time. Having Superman is just kind of let to exist because who can control Superman, and Batman and Wonder Woman representing kind of the guard that's been in charge for a while, but how they will usher in the new guard as well. And I thought that worked rather well, but also having Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter be kind of more of the focus point, being the origin story throughout this sort of like formation of the Justice League, sort of, although they never really say that, but at the end there's a montage, so you're like, I mean, I get it, I assume they formed the Justice League. The idea of having this focus on the origins of Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern is actually more specific to the time period in terms of sci-fi and monster movies, or movies in general, where suddenly you had things focusing more on the space age or, atomic age and things like that. And Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter go more hand in hand with that sort of thing. I think it would have been cooler to have it on the Flash because that was actually historically what led to the influence more of the Silver Age. But I think it was kind of a smarter move because those characters work within that kind of era. Their origins at least do fairly well. So I thought that was actually a pretty smart move. It did get a little annoying. I don't love when you're doing a team up movie. I think the live action Avengers movie does it a lot better, where like you already have all these people developed and you see them coming together. And honestly, I think that was sort of, I read the original Justice League comic like so long ago. I honestly don't remember what happened, but I think it would have been kind of cooler to, especially because most of the people, this was made for fans, even though it was released on DVD in like February of 2008, came on Cartoon Network in October of 2008. It was mainly made for the fans, and that's something I think this thing doesn't, and a lot of DC movies have the problem with, where it's like they're mainly focused on the fans who are always going to buy these things and know these characters, but they also go, well, what if someone who doesn't do that buys this or walks through the room while they're watching it? We have to sort of make it a little more palpable for them, and it sort of sometimes feels like narratively they can't entirely make up their mind, whereas I think sometimes when they're trying to do both, like what they did with the Wonder Woman animated film, I think that works probably better, but this seemed to be a little trying to do both, as certain characters I felt like should have had more time, particularly the big three, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and other characters as well that weren't just Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter. Although I sort of understood what they were doing and I thought it worked well, I would have liked also more time with the Flash. Now, the voice cast I actually really liked, particularly the casting of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. More so Superman, because that was voiced by Kyle MacLachlan, which I think is the only time he's voiced Superman. But when I told people who wouldn't really see a DC animated movie, that Kyle MacLachlan voiced Superman in something they were a little interested in. And it honestly got me a little fan casting about, couldn't he have played Superman in the 90s? Like, how perfect would that have been? And it also works, I think, specifically for the use in this film, in that Superman is representing a past gone era of superheroes, and he kind of sounds like that older kind of father figure kind of thing within his voice. And I think Kyle MacLachlan, like the aw shucksness that Kyle MacLachlan kind of naturally just has within him, I thought worked very well. I know some people have a problem with him, but I think it like sort of works perfectly. He definitely has the range as an actor to do that. He does a really good Superman. Kind of makes me wish they knew how to use his voice with Superman better and kind of get that kind of performance and that kind of persona to work with Superman. I thought worked really well. In this, at least, I was actually kind of shocked to see he was in this. I didn't realize they had such big names voicing people in this. Neil Patrick Harris as the Flash, which is interesting because he was openly gay, I believe, at the time. So that would make him kind of the first openly gay Flash in a feature Justice League movie before Ezra Miller. Kind of interesting factoid, but I also thought he worked perfectly as the Flash. Lucy Lawless finally getting to play Wonder Woman. We all kind of heard rumors that it was going to happen, but it seems like it actually naturally did in this. Jeremy Sisto, who I don't think would be someone who, if you showed me a picture of him, I'd go, oh no, I don't want him playing Batman. I thought he does a good job. Everyone, universally, if they don't like him even, loves it when he says the line where, like, I paid $70,000 for a piece of Krypton to take down the one from Metropolis. I only need a penny to buy a box of matches to take you down, which was pretty, I was like, whoa, that was good. But they're also representing these characters from their origins, and I think that works well. I think it works well with Wonder Woman also. It represents a certain era, so you're kind of casting them more to represent that era of superheroes. And since the DC heroes have been around for so long, it's kind of interesting to have them naturally work within the context of the eras that they were created in. It's an interesting idea. I often think with the DC heroes, like, were they ever meant to keep going for as long as they have? And it kind of goes into kind of the eras that they would have had to really live through if they were in the real world, which I think is cool, which it does very well in this. David Boreanaz as Hal Jordan is fine. I kind of forgot he was David Boreanaz, but I wasn't in love with that performance. And Kira Sedgwick as Lois was neat, and Keith David's great in everything, and Miguel Ferreira, who I also think was good. A bunch of Twin Peaks people in this. The whole design of this works within the 50s kind of era of graphic design, which I think was really cool. My only real thing with this is, like, sure, it does Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter really well, but I would have liked to go into more of the characters, more of what was going on at the time. I would have honestly liked a longer movie, which kind of says a lot about the quality of this film, that it could actually get me go, oh, I actually want more of this. But it did feel like a little rushed in places. I still think this is a good movie, but I don't think it works sort of on its own. I think when the DC animated stuff works really well, it works really well at telling like kind of a complete story using these characters, and almost felt like it was focusing on more showing these characters and showing this time period and showing this concept, rather than just focusing on the characters. I kind of see how this is a place to start and go from for that kind of genre or franchise or whatever it is, but I thought it was really cool that they made this film. I really like Justice League The New Frontier. I think it was kind of a really fun kind of team up sort of movie that was able to use an interesting concept. It says something about how fan communities will probably embrace this more, and they can be a little more ambitious than they ever really would if they made, like, you know, a live action one, which I haven't seen when I made this. They said before I'd never read the comic, and this was also, these movies were going to be based on classic DC comic stories, which is cool because it seemed like, unlike Marvel, they weren't going to use as much of that in the movies. They were going to let filmmakers do their own thing, which is fine, but I sort of like that they are able to go into some of the greater stories of DC Comics. And Justice League would end up really being one of the three big franchises for the DC animated universe, is like Batman, Superman, and Justice League movies. Sometimes other heroes get stuff, but not enough for my taste, really. I'm surprised there's not even like an Aquaman animated movie coming out for the new Aquaman movie. So I kind of wish they would do more with that. That's some of my big, I think they've done a few, like Green Lantern and Teen Titans and so forth, but they haven't really done enough. And this sets off the kind of Justice League animated films on a really good step, because as much as I'm like, yeah, they felt a little rushed in some places, it felt like they could have done more, it felt like they could have had more fun, it was still like something that's making me think about how cool of an idea it was. And maybe if I had read the comic, I'd have more criticisms of it. And I also think it's cool they brought on Darwin Cook, who made the comic that's based on, as a consultant on this. It's an interesting idea. No one was really doing that with DC stories at the time. It's an interesting one to do. I'm sure they could have done Crisis on Infinite Earths first, but they didn't. But this is a good way to sort of start it off in a way. Obviously, they would do that later. And it's kind of an interesting way, kind of showing like kind of the changing scene that was going on with superheroes and kind of inundating it within the culture is cool. You know, I think think Marvel, they could able to do that with things like Marvel's a little more naturally, and I think DC has to be a lot more revisionist with what they were doing, but it's an interesting way to revise it, basically. I think it was really cool, and I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is a perfect film. I think there's a lot of flaws in terms of I just would have liked more with the big three, frankly. I would have liked more going into this world. I was like fascinated by it, but part of me thinks it's because this film was so well told, I wanted to go more into it. And sure, the villain with the whole center thing, I don't think really led up to much. Maybe if they like minimize that a little more. I mean, they can just fight a big monster thing that's coming. It doesn't really need all this like children's book thing and all that. I'm assuming maybe it was more fleshed out in the comic. I don't know. I didn't read it. It just felt like this should have been longer. It felt like I needed more of it. Very few times where I've seen a movie, like, I really enjoyed that, but I wish you did more. It felt like almost like not the complete version. It felt like a summary Cliff Notes version of Justice League The New Frontier, and I haven't read the comic, so I don't really know, but that's just the flow I got from it, that I wanted to delve more into it. I would have been fine with a 3-hour movie. I don't think anyone was going to make a 3-hour animated film go straight to video or anything, but I would have really enjoyed it, and I felt like it had the material for that. But in terms of what this actually was, I still think it's a very good, very entertaining Justice League film, and I think if you want to see a cool animated Justice League movie, I think Justice League The New Frontier will give you that, while also giving you an interesting, thought-provoking concept that, much like the original Watchmen thing, which this obviously borrows some ideas from, makes you think about heroes and vigilantism and how that would all work within the real world had this thing been real, but also being respectful to the characters at the same time. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, but also leaving you very entertained with a really well-animated, interesting feature film. So if you have seen Justice League The New Frontier and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.